Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very magical episode of the It's a Sign podcast.
Welcome, guys. What are we talking about today?
Isn't it obvious? We are here as our radiant elven selves, and we will be talking about elves.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, I've always had a fascination with elves. I love fantasy. I love sci-fi. And I was a big fan of the Lord of the Rings movies. And actually, a lot of what was kind of told in the Lord of the Rings, after I did some research, is heavily based on facts in the real world. And it was Tolkien himself who said that all of his writing was downloaded to him, that it was given to him from another source. So today's episode will be all about exploring the truth about elves, their origins, and we're really going to be unpacking that. Could they potentially have been a real race of beings that existed amongst us on the earth at one point in time?
I'm excited. I'm very excited to delve into this subject.
Yeah, we kind of love the elven aesthetic. And in terms of like spirituality and stuff, I've kind of connected with beings that are almost like elven. I always see them as very high dimensional beings, like very pure source, close to light and stuff like that. And I know that they're these beautiful caretakers of nature and the natural law and order of things. So
yeah,
that's how I always saw them, and it's really cool because doing the research for this podcast and finding some of the evidence that I did really like took my kind of belief in these beings like to a whole new level. So
excited.
yeah. So, basically, we think of elves in fantasy, we think of them as like the Lord of the Rings elves, those beautiful blonde-haired, very perfect almost features, pointy ears and stuff.
Or blonde. What about Kate from Lost?
Yeah. In the actual research, I found that they were either blonde or red-haired.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. But in Lord of the Rings, you have brown-haired beings too.
Black people, white people, because blonde would mean just white people.
Yeah.
I believe elves could come in all different types. It doesn't matter what colour hair you are, your colour skin you have.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely the message and energy of the elves transcends all of that. But most of the time, like, it's kind of met with like disbelief. It's like a myth. It's, just some mystical folks and there's some history about it through the Ireland and Norway and Iceland and stuff like that. But most of it has just kind of, all the research that's gone into it is almost non-existent until recently. And there's been kind of a revival in the historical analysis of folklore of Ireland, and it kind of paints a picture that elves are not wholly fictional, but could be based on real-life beings. So, these beings were not always called elves. In the ancient Celtic tradition, they were called Tuatha Dé Dannan. Tuatha Dé Dannan. And I have to remember that because it's not written like that. The way it's written is like Tuatha Dé Dannan, but the way it's pronounced is Tuatha Dé Dannan. And it has kind of a very sing-songy way to it. But over the millennia, the beings of this race... let's first say, like, what does that mean? The Tuatha Dé Dannan is translated as the people of Danu, or it was originally translated as the people of God, and we'll come to see how that changed over time. But basically, the elves have been called gods, goddesses, fae, and it is known that their civilization flourished on Earth thousands of years ago. Yet there is little written or archaeological history with details about their lives. But we do have some things. The reason for this lack of detail is because Ireland was mainly an oral tradition, so they did not write down accounts and pass knowledge through written word like what was done in Egypt and other parts of the world. But they spoke and transmitted their stories through song, stories, and poetry. And this is kind of it was a druidic sort of tradition and can be seen in more of the shamanic indigenous cultures like Native Americans and Aboriginals and stuff. They also like to transmit things through oral tradition. And stories of these Dannan were passed down through ages into legend via the ancient oral tradition of the poets. So poetry was also, it's not kind of seen as it was today. Today it's seen as kind of a creative art, but poets back then, they were the tellers of history. They were the speakers of truth that, they traveled around the world and they would turn like fact and history into a poem for people to understand. So it used to be a very heightened kind of status to be a poet, and they were almost like the spellcrafters and the truth sayers of the time. But according to legend, there were 6 waves of masters of Ireland, and each has some connection to the biblical story of Noah and the flood, which is quite interesting. And we've kind of gone over the flood in our previous episode with the jinn, and also the previous one with the devil. This flood narrative is always coming up because it's in every tradition throughout time. And yeah, so to this day, one can see in Ireland the great barrows and intricately carved tumuli left behind by the pre-Celtic fairy people. In addition to their wisdom, the Tuatha Dé Dannan, God, I have to remember that, Tuatha Dé Dannan, divine status was reinforced by their incredible beauty. Tall and slight, the pre-Celtic men and women had very light skin, delicate features, blue, gray, or green eyes, and long golden hair, which the fairless beauty could make mortal people crazy. And this is a quote from Coltipin in 2013. And so this depiction the ancient depiction of them is very similar to the depictions of elves we see in Tolkien's work and today. And they certainly have like a stark contrast to the description of the small, dark native people of Ireland at the time that the legends of the elves were going around. So the elves were generally described, like I said, with tall red or blonde hair, the blue-green eyes, the pale skin. And interestingly, archaeology has unearthed evidence all around the world of small colonies of red-haired people from the same time period as the Tuatha Dé Dannan's arrival in Ireland. There were excavations in the Xinjiang province in China which have revealed mummies with red and blonde hair living around 4,000 years ago, which is very interesting because when you think of China now, you do not think of blonde and red-haired people. And there was an extremely well-preserved Egyptian mummy of the nobleman Yoya in 1400 BC, and it shows that he had blonde hair and Nordic features, as did his wife Thuya, who was the Tutankhamun's great-grandmother. So it's possible that these beings were not only in Ireland, but traveled across the world. And back when we said that there were kind of 5 waves, these different like people who ruled over Ireland at the time, in each of the waves, women play a prominent role, reflecting the unique equality present on the island before its incorporation with the rest of Europe. It is said that the tribe of the goddess Danu, which is the Tuatha Dé Dannan, the Elves, were considered as a penultimate group of settlers in Ireland. In myths of the Irish Celts, the north was believed to be a source of great force, and a goddess tribe Danu came from the northern islands full of druidic wisdom and magic knowledge. According to legend, they excelled in science, magic, and had an extremely advanced civilization. So some historians believe that the elves were not gods or goddesses or fairy people, but a druidic race with a rare insight into the workings of nature. There is a quote that kind of extrapolates this, that says that they are a scientific people who comprehend laws of nature and were able to operate it. That Tuatha Dé Dannan had all around knowledge of curative and power properties of plants and used them for treatment of various diseases, mortal wounds, and commission of spells. They also were very skillful handcraftsmen and musicians, soldiers, and poets, and their weapons was considered the best and the most modern. Women had the same civil rights as men and actively participated in all of men's affairs, even in war. Quite often, they spoke as envoys at negotiations between conflicting parties and also sat at councils at conclusions of peace. So they kind of had this very Libra energy where they were like the mediators. If there was 2 warring tribes, they would help to resolve the conflict and sat at councils at the conclusion of peace. So what do you think of that so far?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess I have to hear more. It's I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So far, kind of the legends that we have are aligning with the history that these ancient Celts were passing around. So as their kind of their history evolved, they were seen by the people at the time almost like a godlike group with supernatural powers who ruled over the land of Ireland over 4,000 years ago. They were said to have lived on Earth once before, but vanished away to the north, to the land beyond the mortal realm, only to return long after. According to an ancient document known as the Annals of the Four Masters, which was compiled by Franciscan monks between 1632 and 1636, the Danann ruled somewhere in the 1800 BC range for only a short time, but in that short time they accumulated a lot of fame. And they were said to have originated from 4 mythical northern cities, Moria. Oh god.
You're right now.
Yeah, I think I got a frog in my throat. Okay. Yeah, so they were said to have originated from 4 mythical northern cities, Murias, Gorias, Falias, and Phineas, which some scholars believe could have possibly be located in Lochlan, Norway, although in the tradition of the Celts' history, the islands were said to be of another realm and not of Earth. So the Book of Invasions, which was compiled in 1150, claims that they came to Ireland riding in flying ships surrounded by clouds. That sounds familiar. There's a lot of like stories from different traditions of like these beings coming from the sky in these flying ships surrounded by clouds. And even when we think of mainstream ufology today, we think of these giant clouds that move, that veil the craft beneath it, right? They landed on Slebach, I don't know how to pronounce that, on the hill of Tara. And there's a beautiful line from ancient texts that shows to the wonder of their form. Quote, "The truth is not known beneath the sky of stars, whether they were of heaven or of earth." So when they looked at these people, they were the people of the time who were living there were really like blown away. They were like, I don't know if these are gods or humans or people.
This
like
way it does seem unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is this just like islands mythology kind of thing?
So
what it kind of sounds like.
So what happened was it was mainly an oral tradition passed on through the poets and the druids and the storytellers, and oral history was a big part of Earth's past, like until certain civilizations began to start thinking, hey, maybe we should start writing things down.
Yeah.
And there was a whole conflict about like writing, because writing can't capture the force of words, the intonations, all of this. But what happened was these Franciscan monks began an effort to start recording the history of Ireland before they had arrived. So before Christianity came in and conquered Ireland, but went back when it was the Celts and the ancient Druids and stuff like that. So they came in and started listening to these stories and started recording them all down as the history of Ireland. And as we go deeper, we'll start to paint a bit more realism to them. So what these Franciscan monks gathered was that after the floodwaters subsided, the Tuatha Dé Dannan ships stood upon the hill of Tara in Ireland. So their flying ships came in from the sky, landed on this hill, and it was there where they built their magnificent city of wood, ivory, and bronze. British author Sir Lawrence Gardner describes them as the ancient people of the Tuatha Dé Dannan were the supernatural tribe of the pre-Achaean agriculture goddess Danae of Argos, or perhaps the Aegean mother goddess Danu. But their true name rendered in its older form was the Tuatha Dé Danu. As such, they were the people or tribe of Anu, the great sky gods. And so the more historical name was the Tuatha Dé Anu, which is the people of God. But when the Franciscan monks came to record their history, they changed that name because the Israelites were known as the people of God. So they didn't want that to be confused. So they said these were the people of the goddess Danu, because perhaps they worshipped some sort of goddess at that time. But some have linked them because of the prefix, the people of Anu, to the Anunnaki, that perhaps these were the same sky people that came. But when I think about it, like the legends of these beings is very different from what we have towards the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki are those, kind of aliens or beings that are in the Sumerian tales, where they descended from the sky. But the elves have a very different,
but these
history told
elves,
about them.
They're not. It's just you're associating them with elves, but they're actually, however you say their name. Because for me, it's sounding like what I've heard so far is resonating more as a type of Nordic alien, and I guess that's why I feel like it makes sense that people connect it with the Anunnaki, because they're both coming from the sky. When I think of elves, I think of more human who are archers, and they have special skills, or they live longer possibly, or whereas what these people, how do you pronounce their names?
So I've put it here because I've been pronouncing it wrong. Tuatha Dé Dannan. Tuatha Dé Dannan.
Tuatha Dé Dannan.
Dannan.
They, to me, really sound like aliens. Like, much more than elves.
Yeah, and so far...
They don't even, arch or have the pointy ears or...
But they are said to be good at war. They have swords and weapons.
But then they're like the diplomats, which obviously the aliens, like when we think of benevolent aliens, like that's their role they played in the history that we know of, is they've come to create peace. And yeah, it's just, I think that this could be aliens, and it could be that they present themselves as like what the people of wherever they're visiting would accept. So they'd show up quite different to, like the other tales of the Anunnaki.
Yeah.
And they give them that name. And then they will... Because I really do believe aliens have like higher dimensional aliens that want to come and intervene with us. I feel like they have this ability to just appear how the person who's viewing them would best receive them.
Yeah.
And feel comfortable. And I feel like that's the same as when we're getting guidance from spirit guides, and when we're delving into the inner realms, it's like with you, like you felt like a lot of guides have come through with a more elven visual, and some people who connect with certain religions, when they're having these visions and inner realm experiences, they're appearing as their gods or Jesus,
Yeah.
So I feel like it could even be like a type of guide as well, or an alien. But I feel like...
Well, I think when we get to dive in a bit more, you'll see a bit more what I'm talking about. That they're less like... I think the initial impression of those people at the time were, whoa, these beings are really advanced. And perhaps what's being confused with magic and stuff is a sort of advanced civilization, because even if we think about Atlantis perhaps, or civilizations pre-flood dynasty, there could have been advanced civilizations with technologies that may have been advanced, or sciences, understanding of the science that may be way more advanced, and then after the flood happened they were displaced and maybe they arrived here. Because I'll read out this old legend that kind of paints a picture of the way of life that they had. And so it says that they had gardens with flowers of every colors, birds who kept them company, bees that made delectable honey, and cows who produced the sweetest milk. It is said that the Thua groomed immense horses and rode across the countryside with their long hair flowing behind them. Tall and handsome, these magnificent people wore gold around their necks and crowns of flowers upon their heads. Research indicates that the Tuatha Dé Dannan regained and practiced their skills in accordance with harmony and cosmic laws. Some say, though, that the most advanced practitioners had developed the ability to appear and disappear at will, to transport through time and space. So this is kind of going through to your alien thing. There's like this mix. And the most highly skilled could embody animal forms. During the evenings and into the night, they would leave their bodies in astral flight. Needless to say, they were also precisely skilled in fine arts such as poetry, music, carpentry, and metalworking. And they were at one with their natural surroundings and very connected with the nature of the earth. And they were just very peaceful for a long time until those from other countries began to invade. And before we get into like more of the history of the other countries and other peoples that they began to interact with, we can kind of break that down a bit. And even when we think of like Native American cultures and Druidic cultures, there's a lot of stories about shamans who could shapeshift into different animal forms. And astral projection and dream talk and all of that stuff isn't it's not so out there that a whole people could do that, because we know that indigenous tribes were very proficient in that. I even spoke with this Native American lady who said that in their specific tribe, they would teach their children how to astral project and lucid dream at the age of 8. So if there was a whole culture, based around that, then it wouldn't be far-fetched that they would be very advanced in this kind of spirit technology where they have almost magical abilities, but it's really just the capacity that, I guess, a human or a race of any sentient being could achieve. So it's kind of a very nice picture. There are flowers of every color, birds who kept them company. They rode across the countryside on these giant horses wearing crowns of flowers and stuff like that.
Drinking milk and eating honey.
Yeah, drinking milk.
Very white. Sorry, that's a comment.
The vegan side. So the legends of Ireland tell us that other more warlike races sought to conquer the Tuatha Dé Dannan and keep the island for themselves. So scholars today know most about the final wave of conquerors that came, and they were called the Milesians, the sons of Mil, who were descendants of Noah. And Noah, we all know, is the man who created the ark, who saved a lot of humanity from extinction during the Great Flood. And these Milesians reached Ireland from Spain, apparently, in the 4th century BC. And these are who we come to know as the Celts. They were the ones who eventually displaced the inhabitants known as the Tuatha Dé Dannan, who were the progenitors of the Irish fairies. So originally the 5th wave. So the Tuatha Dé Dannan were the 5th settlers in Ireland. So they weren't like the first or anything. There was people there before them. And like I said before, they were called the people of God, but then with the Irish monks, when they were recounting the histories, they changed it to the people of the goddess Danu, because this was apparently the Tuatha Dé Dannan's primary deity. I'm just going to call them the Elves, because I'm just going to call them the Elves. So, yeah, according to the ancient...
keep calling them Tuatha Dé Dannan.
Tuatha Dé Dannan. Tuatha Dé Dannan. Okay. According to the ancient history, several warlike races tried to take the land of Ireland for themselves. First were the Firbolg, I like that name, the Firbolg, a shorter, stocky race. There's a book called the Lebor Gabala Eren, which tells of Ireland being settled 6 times by 6 groups of people. The first 3, the people of Cessair and the people of Partholon and the people of Nemed, were wiped out or forced to abandon the island. The Firbolg are said to be descendants of the people of Nemed, who inhabited Ireland before them. All but 30 of Nemed's people were killed in warfare and disaster. Of this 30, one group flees into the north of the world. One group flees to Britain, and the other group flees to Greece. Those who went to the north apparently became the Tuatha Dé Dannan in some cases, and those who went to Greece became the Firbolg. The Firbolg were enslaved by the Greek and made to carry bags of soil or clay. Hence the name Firbolg, which means men of bags. And the Cathmage Turid said that they were forced to settle on poor rocky land, but that they made it into fertile fields by dumping great amounts of soil onto it. So apparently after 230 years of slavery, they left Greece and they sailed to Ireland. These people established a high kingship, and a succession of 9 high kings ruled over Ireland for the next 37 years. The seat of the high kings is established at Tara, a site with significance through medieval times as a source of religious and royal power. And as we said before, the Tuatha Dé Dannan landed on the hill of Tara. And so the last high king, Eochaid mac Éirich, is the example of a perfect king. The Fir Bolg are also said to have included 2 subgroups known as the Fir Domnan and the Fir Gaelil.
Jesus.
Really complex, like Gaelic words that are just impossible to pronounce. And after 37 years, the elves arrive in Ireland. Their king, Nuada, asks if they can live on peace on one half of the island, but the Fir Bolg king, Eochaid, refuses. The 2 groups meet at the pass of Balgatan, and according to the accounts, a battle took place which lasted 4 days. During the battle, Sreng, the champion of the Fir Bolg, challenges Nuada to single combat, and Nuada is the king of the elves. And they fight, and then with a sweep of his sword, Sreng cuts off Nuada's right hand. However, the battle quickly turns in favor of the elves, and the Fir Bolg are defeated, and their king Eochaid is slain by the Morrigan. The Tuatha Dé offer them 1/4 of Ireland as their own, and the Fir Bolg chose Connacht, and they are mentioned very little after this myth. But one interesting thing that came from this was what happened after the leader of the elves, Nuada, had his hand cut off. So the Fir Bolg witnessed an elven kind of like medicine person named Dian Kecht, and he replaced the lost limb with a fully functional arm of silver. And it was said that the arm of silver had joints and could move. And yeah, like what if this was the first story of a cyborg? Like God. What if they did have some super enhanced like technology? And later Dian Kecht's son Mayak caused skin and flesh to grow over the metal of the arm. And this is very interesting because this could point to highly advanced technology or magic at the time. So
definitely sounds very alien.
Yeah.
After hearing about their ships and like how the material could just be crunched up and then like completely straight as if it's never been folded. You know, it's just like the aliens obviously have crazy technology when it comes to materials, obviously space travel itself, but like working with materials, having insane materials like for these spaceships that
and something I want to kind of bring up is that like our idea of technology could be very, very different from what an advanced a more advanced race of beings than us consider technology. Like we kind of think of technology with all these bolts and pieces and very removed from any side of spirit or deep kind of cosmic knowing. And it could be possible that these beings were in touch with a very like spiritual understanding of technology, one that was in harmony with nature, that wasn't, you know, so removed and destructive. So it's hard to kind of imagine like, you know, maybe their minds were much greater, that they knew how to materialize and fuse body parts in ways that we don't even understand, that possibly created this arm of silver. Who knows? So the Fir Bolg were not the last people to kind of challenge the Tuatha Dé Dannan. the Fomorian giants followed. So here we have the Fomorian are known as a supernatural race of beings with reddish skin and long, thin hair, and they were said to be giant with tempers and so volatile it was as if they breathed fire. So here we're coming back to the giants. If you haven't watched our giant episode, go and watch that, because there we're kind of proving that giants actually did exist and walk upon the earth.
Yeah, if you're in YouTube, then we don't have that episode on YouTube, but you can listen on the audio formats.
Yeah.
Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I think.
Yeah, Apple Podcasts.
But it's a great episode. I really love the Giants episode. So interesting.
Yeah. So the Fomorians are described as one of the earliest races to have invaded and settled in Ireland. And they were sometimes said to possess like power over certain natural phenomenon. It was often the Fomorians who were, when you were at war with Fomorians, you would often like have plagues or like these weird things and destructive forces like whirlwinds and stuff would happen when you're with the Fomorians. But imagine these big red-haired giants that were a tribe of people.
Red-skinned, thin-haired.
Oh, red-skinned, yeah, thin-haired giants. I guess we don't know the color of their hair. So
red skin is kind of crazy, very devilish vibe.
Yeah. So Elatha was one of these Fomorians who is said to be different from the other giants in terms of personality. He is described in Irish mythology as being interested in justice. For example, when his son Brez wanted to go to war with the Tuatha Dé Dannan, Elatha refused to join him as he reckoned that the cause for war was unjust. So these giants within them obviously have like a complex structure of morals and everything. They're not just these, pillaging giants that want to wage war and destroy. There's obviously different rules of morality and thought within them. But many of the people at the time portrayed the Fomorians as warlike and bloodthirsty. And it was said that in most of the stories, the Fomorians took pleasure in waging war, and when they conquered other races, they would proceed to enslave them. And this happened, for instance, to the Nemids, who attempted to invade Ireland after the Fomorians. And the Fomorians also tried to attack the Tuatha Dé Dannan in a battle named Mag Tuired. But the Fomorians failed, and the Tuatha Dé Dannan succeeded in freeing themselves from Brez, the son of Elatha. And they managed to win that war eventually. But it always seems like the Tuatha Dé Dannan are not actually going out and seeking war. They just kind of want to live, but people keep attacking them. Yeah. So Balor is also a Fomorian king, well known for his destructive ability. And this Fomorian, who came to the aid of Brez in his battle against the Tuatha Dé Dannan, was a giant with one eye, so like a cyclops or something.
Oh, God.
And Balor's eye is said to be so destructive that it would destroy anything it looked at, or poison anything it looked at. But eventually they came to peace, and so the medieval myth of Partholon says that his followers were the first to invade Ireland after the flood, but the Fomorians were already there. Geoffrey Keating reports a tradition that the Fomorians led by Sichel Grenchos had arrived 200 years earlier and lived on fish and fowl until Partholon came, bringing the plow and oxen. And Partholon defeated Siokal in the Battle of Magatha, but all his people later died of plague. So that kind of goes back to the fact that the Fomorians could potentially cause plague or something like that. But it could be exaggerated. So, yeah, about 4,000 years ago, during a time of relative peace between the Fomorian and the Tuatha Dé Dannan, members of the human race invaded the island, and many say they came from Spain and called themselves Milesian. The Milesians are known as the son of Mil, and derive their name from a common ancestor, Mil Spain, which means soldier of Spain. Although the Milesians are said to have invaded Ireland from Spain, their origins lie further east. The story of the Milesians begins with a legendary Scythian king by the name of Phineas Fairsaid, who was involved in the construction of the Tower of Babel. You know the Tower of Babel? Babylon.
Oh, right, yeah.
It's that big kind of, I think it was in Sumeria, tower. And it was said to be built because the people of Earth wanted to reach the heavens, and then the sky people, the Anunnaki, struck that city down because they thought that humans were getting too close to the skies. So that's the Tower of Babel. And his son was Nel, who married Skota, the daughter of an Egyptian pharaoh. And the couple had a son, Gaedil, the legendary ancestor of the Gaels. And when Gaedil was still a child, he was bitten by a poisonous snake. His father brought him to Moses, who cured him with his scepter or rod. Moses was a pretty cool guy. There's a lot of he was the one who parted the sea.
Yeah.
He's some sorcerer of some.
He would walk on water.
I don't know if he could walk on water, could he?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not the best at religion.
I don't know if that was Jesus or Moses. I know that Moses parted the sea.
Could Jesus walk on water?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Good for him.
I tried to walk on water a couple times.
Yeah, failed.
Yeah. Unfortunately. Okay, so after the Exodus and the drowning of the Pharaoh in the Red Sea, Gaedil and his family returned to Scythia. Subsequently, Gaedil and his descendants began to wander in search of the Promised Land and arrived in Spain. One of Gaedil's descendants, Breogan, is said to have established the city of Brigantia. And once they arrived kind of in the area of Spain, they saw that it was not the Promised Land. Breogan had built a tower in Brigantia, and one day his son Ith climbed it, looked across the sea, and spotted Ireland. He immediately set sail for this mysterious island, and when he arrived, encountered the how do I not know it by now? The Tuatha Dé Dannan.
You can say elves. I was only joking earlier.
And when he arrived, he encountered the elves. So even in these accounts, these were a supernatural race of beings who were the most recent arrivals on the island. They are depicted as powerful wizards who came from the north and are thought to represent the pagan deities of the island before the coming of Christianity. For one reason or another, Ith was attacked by the elves when he came and was mortally wounded. He died at sea, and his body was brought back to the followers in Brigantia. The Brigantines wanted to avenge Ith's death, and his kinsmen, the three sons of Milaspain, Eberdon, Eberfin, and Eramon, led the expedition against the elves. Eberdon was not allowed to enter the Promised Land, and as punishment for his brutality perished before setting foot on the island. So the Milesians had much trouble with the elves before they were able to conquer Ireland. For a start, they seemed to have much more trouble than Ith in locating the island. For instance, at times they thought they sighted the land, but upon further inspection found it nothing. The Milesians agreed among themselves that the elves had used their magic to make the island invisible. And it was often seen like a mist would suddenly appear and they couldn't find their way and they'd be lost. And then they'd come out of the myth and the island would be gone. And then they'd see it again. And so it was like they were constantly not able to land on Ireland because of kind of whatever the elves were doing.
I've heard like tales, I think from Ireland as well, like fairies, like they have some bad fairies, you know, and they would like create these myths and people would disappear into them.
Yeah, there's a cool story that I found about the myths. But the myths are very prominent in Irish folklore, and they're often said to be kind of like when the silver mists appear, then that's kind of the veil and the doorway to enter the other realm. So, but eventually the Milesians were able to set foot on Ireland, and the elves did not want to have war, and they claimed by the rules of war that this was not a fair conquest, for that they did not have the army to oppose the invaders. And they suggested instead that if the Milesians were to return to their vessels and able to find the land on the island once more, they would be recognized as the new masters of Ireland. So it was kind of like, all right, we'll give you this land if you leave and can find us again. Which is a strange thing. The Milesians were not very keen on this, and they were very highly suspicious of the elves and their magic, and debated the course of action they ought to take. But in the end, they decided to submit to the case of Amergin, the master poet, who accepted the proposition. The Milesians got into their vessels and went out to sea again and just soon after, a hurricane rose in the sea. The Milesians were scattered, and some even lost their lives as their boats sunk. And it was thought that the elves was the ones who summoned the hurricane. But those who survived, however, managed to land on different parts of the island and they came together and launched a campaign against the Tuatha Dé Dannan. Said it right that time.
Yay.
The Milesians emerged victorious, and the Tuatha Dé Dannan were sent into retreat. It was here that they were pushed underground through the caves of Kesh by the Milesians. And so they were pushed underground into these caves of Kesh, and I'll show a picture. I don't have one for you, but I'll show a picture. It's this big cave network. And that's very interesting because that immediately makes me think of Inner Earth, that they were drove into Inner Earth to survive there.
Couldn't they have taken off in their cloud ships?
So there's a lot of myths that said that once they arrived on the hill of Tara, they actually burned all their ships so that they were showing that they would never retreat, that this was their new land or something.
All right.
So for a long time, the elves were not seen. However, when the Milesians began to suffer famine and disease, they formed a treaty with the Tuatha Dé Dannan, who arose as spirits, or the She. It's written Sidhe, but it's pronounced the She, and joined them half in this world and half not. And the Kesh caves are thought of as the entry to Middle Earth or Inner Earth.
So they then connect a lot with the aliens of Inner Earth.
Yeah.
Which is what goes back around to what I was saying earlier.
Yeah. But one interesting thing is, like, a lot of the tales about Inner Earth were that, like, especially the ones from India and Shambhala, the secret city hidden under Earth, was that the people who lived in Shambhala originally lived on an island north of the Himalayas, separated by a stretch of ocean. And people were like, okay, but there's no ocean north of the Himalayas. And then you start finding all these like fossil remnants and fish bones on the Himalayas. So it's thought that perhaps that once the Himalayas were underwater and that there actually was an island over there. And then some sort of cataclysm happened, which forced the people to move underground into Shambhala. And it was said with Atlantis as well, that Atlantis were a race of advanced beings who were displaced because of the flood, and then they came to Egypt. So we have, like, in all different parts of the world...
Look what the elites are doing now. They're investing in underground bunkers. They're planning to go underground.
Or to space.
Well, it's space, but there's a lot of... Yeah, there's a lot of investment going into land and building underground systems, and then we hear about, like, through the whistleblowers, like, who talk about the alien stuff, you know, how there's these underground trains, right, that the government and the elites and stuff will have, you know, like, know about, and they have a whole thing going on under there. So if shit hits the fan up here on the surface, then, you know, the more powerful are going to retreat underneath.
Yeah, it's probably an instinct inside us that we know to retreat under the earth when stuff starts to happen. So there's basically 16 caves which are situated on the west side of the Keshkaran Hill, and they're part of the Brickleave Mountains and consist of interconnecting chambers, and they're formed from limestone. And so these are the Kesh Caves, which are apparently entryways to Middle-earth. And the area itself hosts tons of sacred sites, and there's a lot of history with cairns and tombs dating back to 7,500 BC. That's crazy. That's a long time ago. So there's a story goes that the Dannan were overthrown by the invading Milesians. It's said that a bargain was struck in good faith once the warring stopped, but the Gaels were cunning and offered to split the lands of Ireland if they were allowed to stake their claim first. When the Dannan agreed, the conquerors chose the land above ground, and which left the gods of old to preside over the lands below. And they were forced to depart beyond the mortal world through the Shee, the earthworks and barrows scattered throughout Ireland. So they made like this deal, all right, we'll split the land in half. And they're like, okay. And they're like, we'll take the surface land, which means you have to get. So it was, instead of splitting the surface land in half, you know, they tricked them, kind of. So the legend goes that they retreated from the mortal realm of Earth and went into a different realm. The stories tell us the name for this world is Tir na Nog, or the land of youth, since within this world it is said that the Tuatha Dé lived lifetimes lasting eons. More famous, so Tir na Nog, the land of the ever young, this was thought as the original home of the Tuatha Dé Dannan, and it could be reached through water by traveling west over the sea or passing through the gateways of the Shee Mounds. In these places, the veil between the worlds was considered very thin and therefore more easily traversable. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of the magical realm is not the eternal youth, beauty, joy, and plenty it represents, but the passage of time attributed to it. In Tir na Nog, time seems to stand still, while in the mortal world it passes in the blink of an eye. The story of Oisin, this is a very famous story. So the story of Oisin, Fionn Mac Cumhall's son, and his otherworld lover, Niam, illustrates this perfectly. After only 3 blissful years in the magical realm, Oisin returns home to find 300 years have passed, where he falls from his horse and his feet touch Ireland's soil. Age catches up with him and he dies an old man instantly. God. And the beginning of that story, which wasn't written in this account, was he was wandering through the forest when a magical mist appeared in the forest. And he began to wander through the mist, and on the other side of the mist, he entered the land of the ever young, and he got to experience this like eternal world of bliss and everything. But then he remembered that he had family and all these things, and just after 3 years, so he sought to find his way back to Earth. And when he did, he was, horrified to find out that 300 years had passed and everyone he loved was dead, and then he died.
I don't know why I'm laughing. It's quite sad.
So this idea of an infinite paradise where no one grows old and time has no meanings has parallels with space travel, alternate dimensions, and even the mundane, such as an advancement in healthcare or medicine or some sort of, very advanced civilization. And the question still lies, were the Danann immortal? And not in the absolute sense of living forever, because they could be killed in battle or by sickness. Although compared with the natives at the time, they were clearly long-lived. Even modern man would seem ageless and long-lived in comparison with our early ancestors. So perhaps these beings just had a way to elongate their life. So the Danann and the Sidhe. So the Danann were defeated in the 2 battles by the Milesians. So they were led to their new domains in the Sidhe Mounds, and as time passed, they became known as the Sidhe, or Ireland's fairy folk, and they were they were led away to their new domain via the Sidhe Mounds of Mannan, god of the sea, who then shielded them from mortal eyes by raising an enchanted mist known as the Fé Fiodda. So that's the enchanted mist that we're talking about. It's called the Fé Fiodda. Yeah, so the Danann magic can be explained, though not proven, as technology misunderstood by the local population. Like if we were to take a nuclear, like we saw in that podcast, if we were to take a nuclear reactor and stick it into the Victorian age, they would have no idea what to do with it. Similarly, with us. So it was possible that they were migrating people from an advanced civilization in our world, perhaps displaced by the Great Flood, searching out new homes, bringing with them what remained of their knowledge and technology. And it could also be that we are not alone in the cosmos, and that they were actually visitors from other worlds or dimensions. Yeah. And that being said, we know we can't really end this episode without talking about the Nordic-looking aliens, Because these beings were not only mentioned in Ireland, but in Germanic and Norse mythology too. So in Norse mythology, they have a whole realm where these beings, elves, who are called the Alfar, the Elven in Norse literature are often described very similarly as beautiful, slim, tall creatures with pale skin and hair and unknowable magical powers. The Alfar, or the elves, were very fluid creatures that did not adhere to normal gender or sexual roles. Further, sometimes these beings were considered gods or demigods, but they were also above the human race. The elves lived either above ground or in Elfheimir, one of the 9 worlds of Norse mythology, specifically for the elven race. And there were dark elves who lived under the ground as well. So, the most ancient form of elves comes from the mythology of the Norsemen. In Norse mythology, elves come in pairs, light and dark elves. Light elves were appreciated and esteemed by the god Odin, and some legends say that the look of the elves was linked to the change of seasons in nature. Elves were mostly immortal, but they could die if their sacred oak tree was cut. Light elves, or Ljósalfar, as the Norsemen called them, inhabited the beautiful world of Alfheim. So Alfheim is part of the Norse cosmology. The Norse people had an idea of 9 worlds, and they're the homelands of the various types of beings found in the Norse and other Germanic people. They're held in the branches and roots of the world tree Yggdrasil, though none of the sources of our present knowledge of Norse mythology and religion describes exactly where in and around Yggdrasil they're located. So there was this one poem called the Poetic Edda, which describes the 9 worlds. And Midgard was the world of humanity, our realm. Asgard was the world of the Aesir tribe of gods and goddesses. Vanaheim, the world of Vanir, were also a tribe of gods and goddesses. Jotunheim, the world of the giants. Niflheim, the primordial world of ice. Muspelheim, the primordial world of fire. Alfheim, the world of the elves. Nidavellir, or Svartalfheim, was the world of the dwarves, and Hel, the world of the eponymous goddess Hel and the dead. So yeah, they believed in all these beings that, the giants, the dwarves, the elves, and attributed different places to where they came from. And it was not unheard of that beings from other realms would come to Midgard or Earth to interact with humans. And there were often gods that from Asgard that bred with human women from Midgard, and elves that came through as well. And the giants were said to have come through. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff there.
Yeah. Norse mythology. I know very little about it, but it's makes sense that the elf kind of visual would come from there originally, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's why I guess these aliens got that name. I think they really are.
The Nordic looking beings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, with all this being said, I don't think we can finish the episode without exploring that the notion that these elves, or the Tuatha Dé Dannan, were potentially the Nordic-looking beings that arise in mainstream ufology today.
Mm-hmm.
So, to really kind of get into it, these Nordic beings they're said to have blonde hair, blue eyes, different color skin, very kind of white light energy, and they're said to be a part of the Galactic Federation of some sort that are here to help humanity in their evolution. But I think one of the most trustworthy and verifiable sources of an encounter with these Nord-like beings comes from an account from a man named Admiral E. Byrd. And this case is also one of the biggest cases for the potential of an inner Earth. And considering that these beings were also apparently forced into inner Earth structures, it adds a bit more weight to this. There's this ancient history that the Milesians forced them underground. And now here we have Richard E. Byrd, he existed in the 1950s. He really came to fame in the 1950s, and he was an American naval officer and explorer, and he was a recipient of the Medal of Honor, which is the highest honor of valor given by the United States. So that he's not just some person, he was given a lot of honor by the U.S. government. So it kind of adds some credibility to his story. And he was an American aviator, a polar explorer, and an organizer of polar logistics. And he had aircraft flights, which he served as a navigator and expedition leader across the Atlantic Ocean, the Arctic Ocean, and he was the first to reach both the North Pole and South Pole by air. So there's a lot of, attributes and achievements that he succeeded in. And he was a very well-respected person. So when eventually one of his secret logbooks from his 1947 flight to the North Pole were uncovered, potentially by his son, people were really surprised at what was written there. And he begins his log by saying this: "I must write this diary in secrecy and obscurity. It concerns my Arctic flight of the 19th day of February in the year of 1947. There comes a time when the rationality of men must fade into insignificance, and one must accept the inevitability of the truth. I am not at liberty to disclose the following documentation of this writing. Perhaps it shall never see the light of public scrutiny, but I must do my duty and record here for all to read one day." And from there it goes into his flight logs. And it's flight logs broken up by the hours, and the beginning just starts 0600 hours. All preparations are complete for our flight northward, and we are airborne with fuel tanks. 0730 hours. Radio check with base camp. All is well and radio reception normal. So it starts off as a very normal kind of account. But it starts to get slightly stranger at around 8 in the morning. He starts to encounter some turbulence, and he says, and by the time it reaches 9 a.m., he writes, "Both magnetic and gyro compasses beginning to gyrate and wobble. We are unable to hold our heading by instrumentation. Take bearing with sun compass, yet all seems well. The controls are seemingly slow to respond and have sluggish quality, but there is no indication of icing." So he's flying over the Antarctic continent right now. And things are starting to go wrong. At 1000 hours, he writes, "We are crossing over the small mountain range and still proceeding northward as best we can. Beyond the mountain range is what appears to be a valley with a small river or stream running through the center portion. There should be no green valley below. Something is definitely wrong and abnormal here. We should be over ice and snow. To the port side are great forests growing on the mountain slopes. Our navigation instruments are still spinning. The gyroscope is oscillating back and forth." 5 minutes later, another log. "I alter altitude to 1400 feet and execute a sharp left turn to better examine the valley below. It is green with either moss or a type of tight-knit grass. The light here seems to be different. I cannot see the sun anymore. We make another left turn and spot what seems to be a large mammal of some kind. It appears to be an elephant. No! Exclamation. It looks more like a mammoth. This is incredible. Yet there it is. Decrease altitude to to 1,000 feet and take binoculars to better examine the animal. It is confirmed it is definitely a mammoth-like animal. So, yeah, he's really puzzled. Things are getting crazy. Things are getting really weird. And at 11:30 in the morning, he logs, "Ahead we spot what seems to be a city. This is impossible. Aircraft seems light and oddly buoyant. The controls refuse to respond. My God! Off our port and starboard wings are a strange type of aircraft. They're closing rapidly alongside. They're disc-shaped and have a radiant quality to them." So all of a sudden he's seeing some sort of spacecraft. And 11:35 in the morning, the radio crackles and a voice comes through in English. The message is, "Welcome, Admiral, to our domain. We shall land you in exactly 7 minutes. Relax, Admiral. You are in good hands." He notes that the engines of the plane stop running. There's strange control. And he says at 11:45 they've landed, and it says, "I am making a hasty last entry into the flight log. Several men are approaching on foot towards our aircraft. They are tall, with blonde hair. In the distance is a large shimmering city pulsating with rainbow hues of color. I do not know what is going to happen now, and I see no signs of weapons on those approaching. And I hear now a voice ordering me by name to open the cargo door." So there we have it, like this appearance of these tall, blonde beings coming who are living in some sort of rainbow-hued city. And the text goes on to talk about like what is said, and there is this like one thing that I just want to read out where it's one of the blonde beings says, "You are in the domain of the Ariani, the inner world of the earth. We shall not long delay your mission, and you will be safely escorted back to the surface and for a distance beyond. But now, Admiral, I should tell you why you have been summoned here." And basically they go on to say that they give him a message of like, you have to protect the world, your nuclear weapons and stuff are harming the world and all of that. But he goes on to explain this like advanced city, but is sent like back later to as like a relay, a messenger to convey this information back to the government, in which he is sworn into secrecy, and we don't hear about it until these logs are released several decades later.
Yeah, I love that. I know that story quite well, and I just find it so fascinating. I don't see like someone like him has any reason to make that up, because he was like quite high up in his career, very well respected. So, why would he make that up?
Yeah.
And that's what I love about a lot of the whistleblower information as well, because they put themselves on the line, and they actually put themselves at risk as well, because people want to shut you up when you're talking about stuff like this. Just to speak the truth, and could be true, could not be, but it resonates a lot with me. And I find it really fascinating, the inner earth stuff, and I guess it can kind of tie back with what we were saying earlier about the stories of these people being pushed underground, and
it's very interesting how the stories kind of link up, and how there's similar stories from across the planet. There's stories of beings coming from the sky. There was the beings coming from the sky with advanced technology that taught men, that had advanced sciences, magics almost. And then the fact that they were driven out and pushed into underground, into a place that is said to be the entrance to Middle Earth, to Inner Earth by Irish folklore. And then having this account from Richard Byrd, who says he's flying over Antarctica and that there are these Nordic-looking beings with blonde hair in this advanced civilization under the earth, in Inner Earth. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely think that they're aliens of some type,
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I'm not sure if they were terrestrial beings that lived on Earth and were displaced by the flood or something, just like the Atlanteans or the people who went to Shambhala eventually.
But they have these very advanced sounding ships by what E. Bird said, I reckon that they have access in and out of Earth. I think they could possibly have, I'm just, putting theories out there or ideas of what I feel like could be the situation for them, but I feel like they live here, but I don't think they're bound to here. I think they probably even have I don't know why, but I get this really deep inner knowing when I think about these beings, these tall blonde inner earth beings. Is I feel like their actual role is more of keeping the planet and the nature and the earth are here, but I feel like they have this role all throughout the universe and possibly other universes. So I feel like there's groups of them because their consciousness has got to this point where it's very advanced and they realize, okay, well, we really want to maintain, the life and, the natural world of these planets and how it's so diverse. And so they don't want to lose that, because it takes very, a very certain condition to create what we have here. And I reckon that it's the same in many different planets. And I don't know why I get this inner knowing, this feeling, this strong feeling that their role is to protect that in many places. And there's groups of them working on the same kind of thing where they're kind of stopping the inhabitants of that planet, which would be us, the main ones, from destroying the planet, because we know that this is something that can be done here and has been done and could likely be done in many other planets. And it's just this, I feel like that's sort of their role, and I think they could be a very, very old race of whatever they are, race of being, and maybe one of the first, one of the oldest, the wisest, and I feel like they could also possibly have the ability to shapeshift and look and appear different to different people as well. Because I do feel like they could have a connection with other beings that have been represented in the past.
And it could be that perhaps they appeared to as they did to the people of the time in ancient Ireland and Norway as some sort of heightened ideal, especially what I consider in the Norwegian culture, where they almost were blonde hair, blue eyes, that is that was the image of beauty at the time. So perhaps they appeared that way for them. But then in Ireland there was a lot of different races going on there at the time, so I'm not sure. And I don't know whether it's
I don't feel like they're particularly trying to come across the aliens, like these higher beings, that as beautiful and attractive
what's most comfortable
and superior.
or something.
I think it's like they want to come across as unoffensive and like approachable. So that would be different for a lot of people. So there's like a softness to their energy, but I just really don't think that they're really physically bound beings. I believe that they're interdimensional beings and really probably spend more of their time just as energy forms, as forms of light. And I think that their look is projected because that's what we know. We know a physical body. But I don't feel like... and it, I could be wrong, but that's just like I feel about these, especially because when they're coming with all this like wanting good for the planet, wanting good for the people, and the way they sort of got their little section up in like down in inner Earth, in the North Pole, I feel like they could possibly have this role all over the universe, and that's why they don't feel a need to like take over, right? They don't feel a need to like rule the planet. I
definitely think they could be. I like that. Like I do see them as like caretakers of the natural law of the natural world, and that potentially they are on this like mission across the galaxy, across the universe, to be like keepers of the peace, keepers of nature, and
maintaining the planet for what it is.
And they could possibly have light bodies of some sort, that they almost project their form into. Because what they say in the mythology is that they become half of this world, half not. So it could be that they have developed light bodies. They're such an advanced society that that they can exist in, that light body, but they project a physical form, perhaps for others to see. And it's always said that they were immortal, that they lived forever. It was possible to kill them in only certain instances where their oak trees were cut. Maybe they had some sort of magics or things where they could plant oak trees to anchor their physical form. Who knows what kind of advanced technology.
That was from the myth.
That was from the myth. Who knows?
But then again, it because I always think of myths as like more just stories, like to sort of get a message across rather than a true situation that happened.
Well, I don't know.
I feel like
myths,
their connection to the oak trees could be that connection they have with nature, that connection they have with maintaining, like cutting down the oak tree, that's destroying, a beautiful asset of the earth. Because their roots go so deep, and they create oxygen, and they can grow to be hundreds and hundreds of years old. So,
and the oak nuts.
You mean acorns?
Yep. I couldn't remember the name. Nuts. I couldn't remember the name.
Yeah. Those good old oak nuts.
Yeah, you picked up an oak nut the last time we were out
an
on
acorn, a really cool acorn. It was it looked like one from the Mario game. It was so cute and perfect.
Yeah, and it's possible that they could have just come to live on Earth, and they just wanted to live on Earth in peace for a while, in physical form or something, because they were depicted, just like those early mentions of them with the birds were always with them, singing with them. They were in harmony. They would ride horses. It was possible that who knows if they were an advanced society that that lived before the flood and moved, but were also part of this like galactic, mission.
Yeah, I think sometimes if you hear of that saying, if you think of that saying, like the best way to influence someone is to be the example, or there's that saying, be what you want to see in the world, right? Because that has more influence on people than telling them. And I think maybe there might have been a time where it was like they were being a living example of like being at one with nature, being connected.
Or maybe to like, truly understand the planet, they had to live amongst it to become caretakers of it. They had to, know the laws, know the like how the people of the earth were behaving and interacting with the people of earth. And maybe perhaps they saw that interacting with the people of earth wasn't the way to do it, because even then people would still wage war on them and attack them. So maybe now they're just operating more unseen.
I think possibly just actually just putting stops into really devastating stuff happening. Yeah,
because it was in Admiral Byrd's flight logs where they said they were the ones who had to intervene after the detonation of the atomic bomb on like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were like forced to come out of inner Earth and to start like, whoa, we need to start monitoring you guys again because you guys are going to blow everything up.
I do think that they play a huge role in the influence of collective consciousness, and I feel like maybe that is possibly more of where they're working now, like working within a type of awakening of the people, because if you think of the collective and how much more powerful that is, like I think you can only go so far with sociopaths who are addicted to power, and if you look at a lot of the experiences people are having, within their own spiritual connections a lot of people are getting a very similar kind of message about exactly that, being more connected with nature, with the earth, and the community, and there's just been, if you even just look over the last 20 years, like the awareness over the damage on the planet, recycling, even just down to those basic things, the awareness has rose. And I think that's where beings like that have influenced the collective consciousness, and that the more and more people are like kind of tuning into that, just getting more of an understanding. Whereas God, when I was a kid, in the 90s, that's not really what people are thinking about.
Yeah, definitely wasn't. People weren't thinking about it.
You see, it's with everyone. Like your grandma now is recycling. Like that's just like one example, and then you can go into the extremes of the spiritual, very spiritual people who are getting, amazing messages from spirit, and that it's influencing like how people are coming out with like energetic healing, people being healed in these like miracle type ways. This, I believe, is being channeled from somewhere. And like you said there about the metal arm and how they had these special healing modalities, sort of that makes you think of, okay, like there is something that people can tune into, and it could be coming from these kind of influence. Like I do feel like they're not physical form beings. I believe that they can influence collective consciousness. They can share this knowledge with us in a less obvious, like a man a tall blonde man walking up to you in a forest and telling you how to heal your disease. I think it's that they've got different ways of sharing that information with us. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So I think we're coming to the end here. So yeah. Interesting episode. I always wish that after these kinds of episodes that I could just jump back in time to see for myself, because all these scraps of evidence are just a little bit too little for me. I wish I could see what it was like at the time. But
I don't like all the war and the giants and it seemed quite savage in a lot of the stories that you were telling today. Yeah,
really just keeps reminding me of I wonder if Tolkien did research on this or if it did just come through him, because it's so similar to Middle Earth and his world. Although we don't have orcs in our history.
Yeah. I feel like they're not far off from those giants described.
Yeah. Uruk-hai. Well, they had giants were different races in Tolkien's world.
Remember our giant episode, giants can come in all different sizes.
True.
Some are just a bit taller than you.
Yeah. Most famous giant, Gilgamesh. And one of the most famous giants, who was one of the kings of Sumer at the time. Brutal guy, but yes.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I hope that you guys enjoyed, and I don't know what else to say.
Then let's bring it to an end.
Let's do that.
And we'll see you all next week for another episode. I have no idea what that will be, but
surprise.
So for now, we are going to fade into the mists.